I'm taking part in a history competition in Germany. This is the most important history competition in Germany, initiated by the German federal president. The title of my presentation is Football and Revolution. It's about the Hungarian Golden 11 and the Hungarian Revolution and Freedom Fight of 1956. You are Ervin Zádor's son, the legendary Hungarian water polo player. Your father and his team won gold at the 1956 Summer Olympics in Melbourne. The most famous water polo match in history was the semi-finals round match between Hungary and the Soviet Union. This match went into sports history as the most violent and bloodiest game ever. What did your father tell you about this event?
Well, growing up with him, he didn't like to talk about it too much. I think it's kind of relatable to when a veteran comes home from war and just didn't really like to discuss all the stuff that did happen that he went through. I learned a lot of information through other people, and he didn't make it seem that important when I was young, so I didn't understand it that way. It wasn't until I got into high school, I started to read it a little bit on my own, and then when I learned all of the most was when the movie came out. So the Blood in the Water movie. And that's when he finally got to the point where he opened up a lot about it, and then we started asking hard questions and got a lot of information at that point.
This match came to symbolize the Hungarian struggle against Soviet rule. It was only a matter of weeks since Soviet tanks and troops had rolled into the Hungarian capital Budapest, brutally crushing the anti-Soviet revolution. Your father had been seen as a rebel to the Soviets and has been celebrated as a hero in Hungary. When did you find out about it, that he was playing such an important role in history? What did he tell you and your sister about that time?
So again, it's kind of that same question. I guess when I was in high school, we started to see articles come up about him in our area because he was coaching in Stockton, California for one of our club teams. And we were at that high school. And I think students, friends of ours would bring us articles. So I'm trying to remember back when I was in high school. And that's when I started to realize this was a lot bigger than I thought it was. Because why would my dad be in a newspaper article and made such a big deal? So that's kind of the first step of knowing how important this was. And again, we tried to have discussions with him. He was just really reluctant about it for some reason, especially with his family. And like I said before, it was not until the movie came out where I think he decided that that was about the time that he could have this discussion with us. And so that at that point, when I saw the movie and listened to some of the interviews, is when I was like, wow, this is a lot bigger than I ever imagined it could be. So,
as the athletes left Hungary for the Olympics, many people thought the revolutionists won. They went by bus to Czechoslovakia and stayed there at the training camp for 2 weeks. Therefore, they had been cut off from the news, and they only found out the extent of the violence when they finally arrived in Australia on the 20th of November. At that time, all the media wrote worldwide about the revolution. The only English speaker on the team bought a local paper at the airport in Darwin and read the news to them. What do you think? How did your father and the other players felt after receiving this message?
That's a hard one. I think from what he has told us about that, it was definitely one of those moments, I believe he said for the first time, that he wanted to go home. Throughout the whole thing, I think the whole team wanted to be out of that. And you have a follow-up question to that, I think, down the road. But it made enough, it basically put him in a position that he wanted to go home. I mean, and I'll answer that question down the road, and you've got one kind of leading up to that. So, he never talked about anybody else on the team when that question came arise, at least to us. So I'm just speaking for him.
The report said that the Soviets came back, bombed Budapest, and revolution was over. That was the time when your father said, okay, that's it, I'm not going home. It has a huge impact also in your life. Can you imagine to live in Hungary?
I've only been Hungary once, and that was, I think, in 2017, I believe. And if you are asking about if being in Hungary during that time, I'd probably say no. But, you know, when we were there, it was a different place. And as I think every country has good and bad things about it. For us, it was a different atmosphere. It's a different environment. Being in the United States, I've never been outside of the United States, but prior to that, there were definitely things that I enjoyed about it. And there were some that I was, you know, the same issues we have here. I think it was surreal having everybody know who my dad was, and I've never even stepped foot in a country like that before. So that was kind of mind-blowing. But I don't know if I'd ever imagine myself living in Hungary. Yeah.
Before leaving Hungary, he wanted to be sure that his parents are okay, so he snuck out of the training complex in the countryside to visit them one last time before leaving Hungary. He went back home 25 kilometers on foot. What did your grandparents tell him, to leave or to stay, or do you even know it?
So that was kind of that one question. You know, after receiving the message, that's with everything that was going on, the first thing you want to do is go home, and he did. I know that he told us that he did travel at night, I believe, and went home and surprised his mom. And his story was told to us that as soon as he walked in the door, his mom slapped him across the face and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" They called him a bunch of names. I won't say it with you, but yeah, she was very upset about it. And they gave each other a hug, sat for a little bit, and she basically told him to leave. So that's the extent of the story on that. So yeah, pretty crazy.
Did he ever see his parents again?
Yes, his brother and his mother came over to America, and his mother was here. I don't know exactly the date that she did come here. It was shortly after, and then she spent her entire remainder of her life here. Yes, and then her brother, same thing. And the brother's family and everything all moved to the United States.
Okay.
My grandfather, I never knew, and my dad didn't have a lot of information on him, or didn't really divulge too much into it. So I don't have a lot of information on that.
The Hungarian Revolution was crushed by the Soviet army. No one came to help the revolutionists. Many people had been killed or deported, thousands more arrested. The athletes wanted to fight back in the pool. There were no tanks and no weapons, only human power. What did your father tell you about the Hungarian Revolution?
So again, this was, you know, I didn't find out too much information until the movie came out. That's really when I learned the in-depth of everything. And I think that was his way of letting us know exactly kind of what happened. So, you know, if you've watched the video, kind of the same place where I started learning a lot about the revolution. He told us stories, little stories here and there about his experiences and everything else. But when it came to the actual war itself, he didn't really touch base with it. I think it was a very sensitive subject for him. Once the movie came out, then we started to ask some questions, and it was all based on kind of, I think the movie was a really good general explanation of what he went through and how things went. So, and I'm sure you saw that movie. So that's when, like I said, that's when he basically told us about the Revolutionary War.
Your father had scored 2 of the goals. The Hungarian led the Soviets 4-0 before the game was called off in the final minute to prevent angry spectators. Because Valentin Prokopov punched your father's eye open. He climbed out of the pool with blood streaming from his head. The crowd went wild. Spectators jumped the barrier and rushed towards the Russian team. The Australian police had to escort them from the swimming pool. Until today, many media remember this blood in the water match. A picture of him, with blood cascading down his face, was published in nearly every newspaper on the planet, and he became an unwitting symbol of Hungarian resistance. How do you feel when you see these old pictures?
So that's a funny one. Again, when I was in high school, that's when I started to realize how big of a deal this was, and I didn't, at the time, before all this started, I didn't think much about it. It was never really a big discussion. I went to school one day, and that very picture you're talking about is black and white, got put into our local paper, and I had about maybe a dozen of my friends come up to me and ask me what happened. Because at around 18, 19, I looked similar to my dad, pretty much identical almost. And so they thought, without reading the paper, they thought it was me. So with the blood, they came over and wanted to ask all this stuff. And I was like, what are you guys talking about? Nothing happened, I'm fine. Someone brought me the paper. I'm like, that was my dad. And so that's kind of, at that point, I was like, wow, this picture is pretty iconic if people are seeing this all over in local papers. And, there are a lot more pictures, more sentimental than just that one. I think that one's like the most famous one, but for us, we have more sentimental pictures that we have found along the way that have touched our family, which have been incredible. But yeah, that one, I think you can't, I think that's just the one that if anybody's like, oh, that's the story right there, that said it all. You can almost write a book just on that picture alone. So that picture right there was pretty incredible. The other pictures are a little bit more personal, I guess you would say. Just pictures of him in the water and stuff like that they used on the side, but it didn't describe that one picture. Yeah. So it was pretty incredible, and yeah, I mean.
Do you think it was the right decision by the Swedish referee to call off the match?
I believe so. I've never been asked that question. So personally, I being a water polo coach, I think so. I think there are times where enough's enough. And I think with everything and all what was at stake, I don't think it was going to get any better in that environment. From what the movies had just depicted, there was a lot of hostility going into that. There was nothing good coming out of that. That was one of the biggest matches of the entire Olympics. So I was kind of sad to what broke my heart most about that particular situation in game was that my dad was injured and didn't get to play in the final game. He was there and a big, huge part of it, but that single moment took him out. And for me, that would have, and I know it bothered my dad a lot. I mean, I could tell that he didn't get to play in that final game because of it. So he had a lot of resentment towards that whole situation. But I do believe it was the right call, and I think I personally would have made that call too, knowing everything that was going on. Yeah.
Besides your father, many of the Hungarian athletes didn't return home. It was the half of the Hungarian Olympic delegation. Your father moved to the United States and settled in Northern California. Becoming a businessman and swimming coach, he trained a teenage Mark Spitz, the US Olympic swimming legend from the 1960s and 70s, and still coached other young swimmers. How do you feel to have a legend as a father?
It's not so much as personally a legend for me. It's being able to, because I am a swim and water polo coach. It's having the opportunity to walk up on deck and people tell me stories about my dad. And that's always great. A year could go by, maybe even longer than that. And then an older gentleman or a coach on the deck comes up and says, hey man, I got a great story about your dad. And so to me, people see him as a legend. To me, I like that just because people remind me of him. People have conversations about how he related to them and how big of a part he was to them. And those stories mean more than anything to me. So if that's, if people want to call him a legend, I'm okay with that, just for that reason, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, My dad was very humble. He didn't like the limelight. He didn't like any of this. He didn't like the interviews or the questions and stuff like that. He did answer them, but to him, he wasn't a legend. To him, he just was doing what he needed to do, and that was it. And so he kind of pushed that upon us to almost make it sound like we didn't see him as a legend. We just saw him as our dad. Does that make sense? Yeah. So again, being a legend outside of our family was great just because we got to hear stories from other people about that. For us, it was more personal. So.
You run the Ripp Aquatics program that your father founded. What is it about?
Ripp Aquatics was founded in 2002, a very small little town, Central California. And he had started up quite a few programs along the way. He basically retired a few years prior to that. He also ran a rifle range in Linden, California. And the reason why is he, throughout the whole Revolutionary War and everything else when he was a kid, he got to play with a lot of stuff that was left behind. And it always intrigued him. There's some pretty incredible stories about that he's told us. But I think he was always into that kind of stuff because of it. So he saw an opportunity out in Linden and bought this property and turned it into a rifle and pistol range. And it was a family business where I grew up. That's where I was basically born and the rest of my family. And on the side of that, he remained coaching in Stockton, California for a while, Manteca and that surrounding area. Then he retired for like the 6th time. And a gentleman out of Ripon, California, they just rebuilt their pool, was looking for somebody to help them start their programs. And my dad was known for that. So they gave him a call and he said, hey, if you let me do it the way I want to do it, then I'll come in and help you. It was supposed to only be a couple years, ended up being 10 years. And then in 2010 is when he was ready to say, okay, I'm done now and it's time for me to retire. And that was the moment when I knew he was absolutely serious about it. The other times it was like, nah, you're not retiring. So he said, it's either going to shut it down or you can take it over. And so I said, no, I'm going to keep this going for you. And that's what I did. So in 2010, I stepped in, worked alongside with him for the last couple of years, and basically been running it ever since. So it's a small club team that we have water polo and swimming club, and then high school water polo and swim we started. He organized swim lessons and recreation teams. It's a small 25-meter pool, and he did a phenomenal job with it. It is one of the most successful programs in the area, and it was basically all because of him.
You brought your father's ashes to Hungary in 2017 to spread his ashes over his native soil. Why did you and your sister decide to do it? Was it your father's wish?
Well, it was a very long family discussion. I think we talked about it for a while. My father kind of gave us the blessing to do what we thought was best. I think he was kind of one of those guys that was, like, hey, whatever you guys need to be okay with all of this is he's okay with. We had also spread his mother's ashes at the same time in Hungary. And as a family, we discussed it in depth that we thought that would be the best because that was his home. There was a lot of people there that had honored my dad, and he, being who he was, we thought that Hungary deserved a part of him as well. And we thought maybe it would be selfish on our end just to kind of keep that to ourselves. And so, because at that point, later down the road, we realized how important he was to a lot of people. And so that's kind of a family decision that we made. So it worked out real well because at that time, that was the FINA World Championships. We actually got to compete, my sister and I, which was an incredible experience because of it. Hungary was gracious enough to allow us to do all that and set it up. We got a pretty in-depth kind of understanding about my dad being in Hungary. We learned a lot more just visiting Hungary of who he was in that situation. And I think one of the greatest experiences I had there was being able to practice, or not practice, but warm up in the pool that he practiced in every day of his life. That was incredible to me, to just kind of be swimming in that pool and looking up and imagining him being in that same pool. That was my best moment there. Yeah. So.
So what does your sister do?
My sister was coaching with my dad for a long time. When he started Ripp Aquatics, she was alongside him. I was in a different job and raising a family at the time. And she, like all of us, went on her own way, and then eventually came back. And then she is now took over my father's business out in Linden, the gun range. So we, as my sister and I, had decided that we aren't going to do both. My dad was always doing both, didn't have a lot of time for family and other things because of the two businesses. So we decided that it would be best just to split the two. And she got really involved with that. And I obviously got involved with the coaching side of things. Sorry. Are you there? Okay. Sorry. My phone's getting close to dying. But yeah, so she is currently right now running that side of the business.
Do you have any relatives in Hungary?
Not that I know of. Everybody pretty much came over here. So I don't know if there's anybody left over there. So yeah, I have no clue.
Mm-hmm. What kind of man and father was your father?
He was obviously an incredible man with a lot of stories to tell. He was also very humble. He didn't like to talk about a lot of things, like I said before. He was a very devoted person. He touched a lot of people's lives throughout his career, especially in the coaching atmosphere. We had a memorial for him, and I didn't realize that a lot of people came a long ways to celebrate his life. And I think that moment was like, oh my God, this is the amount of people that he, and all these people had some relation with him. And, for a long time, it was kind of me being selfish, but that's when I realized it was more than us. The way he expressed his love and everything else towards everybody else was I was like, okay, well, this isn't about our family as much. This is about everybody else as well. And I think that's when I really started to understand my dad more. He surprised us a lot. So that was kind of crazy. For everything that he's gone through, there was always times where he surprised us. And so he was a good man.
Do you know anything about the Hungarian Golden 11?
Not too much. I met one, and I don't remember on the top of my head what his name was. It was during the ceremony when we did the Ashes over there in Hungary. I've only met one. Everybody else I didn't know. Again, that was the Golden 11 was basically just through the movies and that kind of stuff that we found out about. But in specific, there were just some things my dad just never really talked too much about, kind of like his father. I didn't know a lot about him. He didn't talk too much about him. And when we had questions about it, he didn't really kind of say much. So, there's some personal things there that, he kept to himself. But no, I don't know too much in depth about it. I know that their discussion being when they were just before the match with Hungary, they when they traveled to Australia, they didn't even get a chance to touch the pool for 2 weeks prior to that game, or prior to getting into the Olympics. I think their main goal was just to make them angry. He always talked about how he liked to upset the other opponents by talking smack. In America, we're not allowed to do that anymore. So, but he was able to do that a lot and piss a lot of people off, which is kind of why I think he ended up getting hit with a lot of emotions on that side. But their whole main goal was just to make that Soviet team angry by just pestering them as much as they could. I think they knew the outcome of it, and I think they were ready for it. And I think it was a good game plan. But Obviously it didn't end the best for my dad, but yeah, that's kind of the only stint that I know about that Golden 11. Other than that, just kind of some of the things that I learned along the way on my own. Mm-hmm.
So thank you for the interview and for your time. I wish you a great year 2021.